Natalie.
I think
And
give it a couple more seconds. I
oh,
think we're about to connect. There you go. Now
yeah.
go.
All right. Thanks for having me, Natalie. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. If you are just joining, we'd love to hear where you're dialing in from today. I will let you know I am in Santa Monica right now. I'm sorry, Santa Barbara, California, but I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm really excited to spend the next 30 minutes with all of you talking about starting the renewal at hello. So great. Oh my goodness, we have people calling in from Australia and Russia and a place I cannot pronounce. So I'll skip that one, but thank you for joining us today. And what I'm going to do is share my screen. If you'll just give me one quick moment. Here we go. And we'll get started. So, starting the renewal at hello, what does that even mean? And why should you even listen to what I'm saying? I've been in tech and in customer success for a really long time. Before that, I was a Scrum Master and a PMP certified project manager working on our ERP projects globally. But the rise of customer success just took my heart. And here I am as a customer success consultant working with clients globally along with my team. So thank you for having me. And what we're going to be talking about today is the big picture of why you should start the renewals early in your organization, how to do it, and then 4 tips to really get started. And what I've tried to do with this presentation today is make sure that everyone is able to have some key takeaways that they can talk to their executives about and really get them involved in understanding the ROI of customer success and specifically onboarding. So let's start with why start the renewals before the kickoff? Why is that so important? Well, SaaS really changed everything we do. Probably many of you were not born before the late 90s when the SaaS.com boom and then bust occurred. But that was really the first time that no longer were companies able to just worry about sales. They had to also think about what happens after the marketing and the deal is closed. So before the late 90s, it was more on premise, one time revenue, sales, and support. And then what happened is the late 90s, the subscription model, right? So no longer was sales king, but rather what happened after that opportunity closed and there was a relationship. And companies quickly realized that if they had a poor onboarding and a poor customer experience, especially with the rise of social media, you'll know that suddenly you don't have a customer. So you really need to make sure that you're thinking about how has my business even how has it been born? Just even the company JustCall, it didn't used to be able to exist until the subscription economy occurred. That really changed how we viewed customers. And this is one of my favorite quotes. His name is Joey Coleman. He's a CX professional and writer, and his book, very easy to read, enlightening. He has worked with people and companies all over the world and has really, we're very much aligned that if you have a poor experience at the beginning with anyone, you have a poor experience with your new boss, with someone you just meet, someone you're interacting with, maybe even a customer, it's very hard for that customer if they have a poor first impression of their experience while they're in the honeymoon experience with your company to get over it. There's always going to be that fear of, oh, I had such a terrible onboarding. What's the next phase going to be like? How can I trust this company again if the onboarding was so poor? And with so much competition out there today in most verticals, you'll know that If you don't have a good onboarding, there isn't going to be a good opportunity for renewals. And then for anyone who doesn't follow David Skock, he's not only a serial entrepreneur, but he writes brilliant blogs. Highly encourage you to follow him. I love this quote around losing a champion and failure to successfully onboard, right? Those are the two main causes, he argues. If the champion who purchased your product leaves, then what are you stuck doing? You have to educate your customer success team to identify those risks and to essentially resell. You may have to bring in your sales team again if they're responsible for the reselling, but it's just really important to think about that. And so today what I want to show you is how do you do this? Now you know why onboarding is so important. Let's dive into the specifics. And this is really important. People call onboarding, implementation, orchestration, and all sorts of other fancy words to really say very different things. And so I want to make sure that we cover this. And I presented at SaaStr last year with Donna Weber. She recently published a book on onboarding matters. And the reason it matters so much is that it is the opportunity during that honeymoon stage for you to develop a relationship with your customers. Your customers are no longer just accounts that give you money. They are actual human beings. And if you humanize them and you build relationships with them, they will remember how you made them feel at the beginning and that you were actually listening to them, that you're treating them as a human, not as a number, a book of business. So it's just really important to understand that the implementation is more of the technical. How are we going to get onto your platform? Who do I need in terms of from the technical side to make this all come together? That's incredibly important, and do need to focus on that. But before you do, start building the relationships, and we'll talk about that. How do I build the relationship? Stop calling them accounts, put the customer at the center right from the beginning, and really make sure that when you're thinking about that, there's some key things you're thinking about. One, who is my customer? What is the persona? Often, whoever is purchasing your product is not the same person who is implementing the product. So it's just really important that you are thinking about all the different personas that purchase your product and then who joins, whether it's a project manager, suddenly a technical team, their own customer team, whoever it is that is going to be involved. You really need to understand their persona and what they care about and why they should care about your product, right? If you just keep trying to put all of these features in front of them, getting them to adopt all the features at once, you're not putting your customer at the center. Really take the time to understand what are their pain points. How are we going to show them value with the product early in the customer experience? So how do you do that? Few simple steps I want to share with you. I'd love to know if any of you have a really seamless handoff between your sales team and your onboarding or your customer success team. Love to see some people chatting in here, but it's really important that you make it simple. People often say to me, "Well, Amelia, our sales team doesn't have time to have a call with the customer success managers." If your sales team just invested 30 days, 90 days in building that customer relationship, are you telling me that they're not willing to spend time educating the customer success manager for 5 minutes on what do those notes mean in your CRM that they quickly rush through? It's really important that you have a seamless handoff. Can be a one pager, a few slides, a quick phone call to really ensure that that customer success manager understands the pain points of the customer. Next, the decision maker. While the decision maker may not be part of your implementation, the more technical piece, they do need to be at the kickoff. Even if they drop after the first 15 minutes, it's really important that you have them at the beginning, that you reiterate, you understand. The salesperson told me this about why they purchased the product and their pain points. Let's make sure we hear it from the customer decision maker and that they feel heard, that they're making a good investment. Often, whoever decides to purchase the product will hand it off to a project manager or someone on their team to implement it. They have their own goals, right? They have their own KPIs. They want to be a hero in their own story. And they're worried about just getting this implemented and moving on to the next product or project potentially. So you want to make sure you have the decision maker there. You understand everyone's role and what matters to them. Third is confirm what you know. And we teach at Growth Molecules, the consulting firm I'm part of, we teach a methodology called SCORED. And it's really all about understanding the customer's challenges, first their situation, right? Like who are they? What industry are they in? Where are they even located? Building that relationship with them. And then what challenges are they currently facing? Surely before they landed on your company's website, did their research, talked to a salesperson, they had a challenge or a pain point and they educated themselves, and then eventually they're engaged with you. So really understanding the challenges that brought them to you, and then what are the opportunities for you to build a relationship together. If you are simply just going through the motions of onboarding without understanding what does their success look like in a year from now, you're missing a great opportunity to build a relationship based on results. And one that's really important is expectation setting. Make sure you're working with your customers to explain what do you expect of them to be successful and what can they expect of you. And last but not least, not enough CSMs or onboarding managers ask about deadlines. What deadlines does the customer have to get this product up and running? Maybe they're rebranding, they're relaunching, there's something really important. They're getting ready to go public. They need this project finished in X amount of time. You kind of need to know those deadlines to ensure that you're working on a project plan and a timeline that works for everyone. Something I always encourage CSMs to do, connect with your customers on LinkedIn, learn about them, their industry, stay on top of when they're leaving or moving companies. Just because they're leaving your company doesn't mean they're leaving your product. If you've heard Ziv Pila speak at one of my sessions around Leaders Labs, he's been at Apps Flyers for 9 years, and he has customers that now have purchased his product for 4+ times as they've moved to other companies. Next, you want to think about your surveys post-launch. Companies mark a customer in their CRM live, but is the customer really thinking that you're live? Are you really understanding if the customer recognized the revenue impact, the value of your product the same way you're marking it as live? And then making sure that you bring back that executive who is on the kickoff to make sure they see the value and the impact of your relationship and your product. And when I was at Bright Edge, this was really part of our culture. Without a decision maker at the kickoff to understand their needs, and without a decision maker at the post-launch executive business review, the meetings didn't occur. We rescheduled them because we knew we'd have to have the meeting again, or there's a big red flag if they're not going to invest a mere 30 minutes understanding where they're getting their ROI from this investment that for enterprise is rather a large investment. And then last but not least, show value by sharing relevant content early and often throughout the journey. There's so many platforms out there that do this beautifully. I think of HubSpot. When I first joined, it forced me to go through an onboarding experience where they really understood what I cared about. And then they started giving me content that's relevant to me as the founder of Growth Molecules. I think of Gainsight. They have Journey Orchestrator so that they're able to give their customers content that's relevant when they need it throughout the customer journey. So there are many platforms out there to help you do this. So how do you do this as you become more complex and especially for enterprise? I've focused this whole presentation on more of a enterprise model or customer. You not only need to very clearly define the strategy and rollout plan, you need to review the service agreement, right? You need to make sure, especially if new people are doing the onboarding, not the decision maker, of what was promised and what's in scope. We customer success managers are too nice often. We want to do everything to please, and we're afraid to say that's out of scope. And often, for example, when I was at WalkMe, white labeling was an added cost. So to be able to white label, that's out of scope. You don't just get it. And sometimes it's really important that you bring the service agreement up and you explain it to ensure that what was signed by the decision maker is really understood during the onboarding, and then you can go into configuring and training. All too often I see in onboarding CSMs being asked and trained to get the customer trained on every feature, but guess what, your customers don't care about your product. They don't care about all the features your product has. They have a pain point, they have a challenge, they want to address those pain points. And if you take the time to give them early wins, early impact, early value, they will be more curious about leveraging the rest of their product once the pain points have been addressed or the opportunities that they're expecting in this relationship. And then, of course, once you go live, that's great, but how are you going to do change management? Again, we teach a lot of courses, and I'm very fortunate to work with some wonderful companies who share a lot of information, and they share with me, Emilia, it's great. We've got the onboarding, the people who were onboarded, they love the product, they fully bought in, the decision makers bought in. But the people who are now using it every day don't want to go through this change. They're not adopting it. That's because the onboarding failed to address change management. So you really want to make sure you have change management as part of your onboarding strategy to get to your renewals, and really being comfortable, educate your team to ask, what does success look like in 30 days? And what does it look like in a year from now? Pause. Let them answer you and give you some numbers or pain points that they're experiencing that you want to work together as a partner to overcome. And then agree on expectations. If they're expecting out of scope work or a timeline that is not doable, you need to have that candid conversation, and you need to practice with your team these type of scenarios. And then, very important, make sure your client, your customer, is signing off on what is a joint success plan, right? A mutual action plan to get them to their realized value or why they purchased the product in the first place. Having these kind of conversations early will really help your company with the renewals and starting them from day one. Now, this is just another example of starting the renewal early. It's for a more complex client we worked with, a more robust onboarding program. You can see their onboarding is over 3 months, but you can still see here clarity and expectations of what they're expected to do versus what we're going to enable them to do. So with 10 minutes left, I want to run through 4 quick tips to get you started, and then I'd love to take any questions. So first of all, when you're creating your onboarding playbook, I'm curious how many people on the call have an onboarding playbook. You want to make sure that you have a vision that the entire company can align around and hold themselves accountable to. If you have a vision that you roll out to your company, then you can hold them accountable once they've signed off on it. Just like you're asking your customers to sign off on a mutual action plan, show your vision to your company. It doesn't have to be complex. It can be a one-page strategy. Often CS leaders get so hung up on these complex strategies. Start with a one-pager and really understand, what do customers say they need? How will we show value continuously impact on a customer's business? And how do we know? How are we measuring that there's actual impact? Intuition, depending on your CSM, is not good enough anymore. There's too many incredible technologies out there to help you. And then how do you get help? And this is where the one pager really is helpful. It's important that you're holding people in your vision accountable. When can I go to product? When do I go to support? And all the other teams like marketing. I need marketing's help to create curated content for my customer's journey, especially if it's more of a low touch enablement journey for your customers. So start with a one-page strategy, get your company rallied behind it, and then move to the people, right? Your people are the face of your product, your company. Invest in them and their essential skills. They're no longer called soft skills. That's a thing of the past. They're essential skills to build relationships with your customers, because relationships are what people remember when they're thinking about, am I going to get on that call? Is this important to me? If they know that you're invested in their success, they're more likely to join those calls and be engaged with you. Or if they're not getting a lot of value out of the product, they're more willing to tell you instead of ghosting you. So really important, enable your team with essential skills. We teach CSA accredited courses. We have 12 of them. And honestly, this is one of my favorite topics that I love teaching out of the four, and that's emotional intelligence, applying emotional intelligence to customer success. This is just an example of starting the renewal early, making sure that your team that is focused on onboarding, adopting, and training is seen as a growth enabler. If you don't have a strong team on the left through the customer's journey, there's no way you're going to get to the renewal and expansion. So number two, processes. Always be thinking about operationalizing your business. Too often companies they train CSMs on the product, the technical, but they forget to operationalize with playbooks on how to have an executive business review, for example. And this is just some of the foundational how-tos that at Growth Molecules we believe you need to enable your customer success managers with playbooks. And then across the playbooks, as great as they are, if you can't measure success from the customer's perspective and your perspective to hit your KPIs, your company goals, then the playbooks are probably not as actionable as you think. So when I say things like moments that matter, they're moments that matter to the customer where they're actually getting impact from your product. So these are just some of the processes you want to be thinking about operationalizing. And then systems. How can you operationalize without systems? And make sure you have an operations team. I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago around operations, and it's just so incredibly important. Salespeople don't ask their sales managers to run Salesforce and Excel and a bunch of Excel sheets and do a bunch of operational things. Operationalize your team with an operations manager and systems to reduce errors, to measure success, and to make better decisions when you're managing your team and when you're making decisions, when you're presenting to the board. There's so many customer success platforms out there to help your teams focus on what matter. And I'll keep saying it, it's the relationships that matter more than forcing more product on your customers. If they are able to adopt the products that address their pain points and they're able to build more relationships with your CSMs, they're more willing to buy more of your product. And there are stats out there that show your customers are more likely to buy your new products than new customers. So that's why relationships really matter. So I'll leave you with one last thing. If your chief operating officer, your CFO, asks, well, why do you need an onboarding plan? Why do you need a team to invest in this? Or why do we need an onboarding playbook? You can share stats like this. They're all over the web. I think just that 5% increase in retention has to start during the renewal. If you have an onboarding, if you have an amazing onboarding where they have the moments that matter, where there's continuous adoption and impact on their own business, they're able to measure it, then you have a winning strategy. So with that, I will take questions. So let's see, I have one. What metrics can we use to showcase the value of emotional intelligence? It's a marathon and it's often challenging for people to believe in the marathon, not the sprint. Yeah. So emotional intelligence, I think it's really important to measure things like how many executives are you able, if you're looking at things like the kickoff, or the how many executives join the kickoff versus the executive business review at the end of onboarding. If you're able to look at, was there an increase? I think that's really important. I read a stat a couple days ago that says 77% of executive decision makers don't attend the EBRs, right? They don't think it's important. You haven't made an emotional connection. The other metric I would value is your employee retention. Even this morning, listening to the news, getting ready for this conference I'm at, and the news was talking about the record number of people leaving their jobs. So that's another metric. If you teach people how to be confident in their conversations with other employees, with their bosses, with their customers, and they feel enabled, that's a success metric that's really important. And if you Google emotional intelligence for sales, there's so many books out there. There's so many stats out there that show people who possess strong emotional intelligence are the best leaders out there, and they are incredible salespeople. They don't focus on the product, they focus on the human relationship. So hopefully that gives you some ideas around EQ. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Yes, there's another comment here. Let me see. Let me find it. So here is, we want to refine our handoff. It could be a lot better. How much or how little do we need to capture? What is most important?
Yeah, I love that question. I always say keep it simple. If you use recording technology of customer conversations, make sure that's in your CRM. And then you want to make sure that things like what is important to them, their pain points. I always say try to get three pain points that they really want to address, and then the decision makers and the users, right? Who am I going to be working with? I'd also mentioned the deadlines, and then why did they purchase the product? Even thinking about, did they talk to any competitors? If your sales team is asking those kind of questions, it's really important that you document that. When I was at WalkMe, we created a seamless handoff. It was in the CRM. And then as soon as the opportunity closed, an email went out to CS. We had all of the required information in an email so that the CSM knew it was time to schedule a call with the salesperson. And they weren't long calls. They could be 5 to 10 minutes to confirm they understood everything in there. And especially in a virtual world with many different cultures, many different forms of communication, what you read may be misinterpreted. So hence the need for that seamless handoff that I'm a big advocate for.
Awesome. Looks like we're right at our time. Let's see, there's one more comment there. Great session, Emilia. I always learn something when I tune into one of your talks.
Oh,
Amazing.
thank you
And
for
this coming
joining
from
me,
you.
everyone. Have a great
Thank
rest of
you.
the
It was
event.
our pleasure. Thank you so much, Emilia. Have fun traveling, probably back or home, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time. And for everyone in the session, we will see you in the next session.